Good afternoon, everyone. We still have some people coming in, but I think we should start. We have a lot of people here. My name is Jeffrey Spear. I'm the Anissa and Paul John Balson II Senior Curator of Antiquities here at the Villa, and I'd like to welcome you. This is the 13th annual Villa Council Presents Lecture, which is made possible by the generous support of the Villa Council, a group of patrons passionately dedicated to the Villa's mission of bringing the traditions of the ancient world to a modern audience. It's a great pleasure to be able to introduce the brilliant artist and filmmaker Shireen Neshat. Born in Iran, Shireen came to the United States as a teenager to study art at the University of California at Berkeley, where she received her BA, MA, and MFA degrees. She remained in the United States after the revolution in Iran and moved to New York, where she is now based. Beginning in the early 1990s, with a series of striking photos addressing aspects of femininity in Islamic Iran, notably the series Unveiling, 1993, and Women of Allah, 1993 to 1997, and also remarkable video. Shireen investigates the nature of personal identity and freedom, especially in relation to oppressive political and religious circumstances. Her work is always highly poetic, politically charged, and deeply moving. She's directed 3 feature-length films, Women Without Men in 2009, Looking for Kulthum in 2017, and most recently, in 2021, Land of Dreams. I'm sure many of you will have enjoyed her superb retrospective, I Will Greet the Sun Again, shown in 2019-2020 at the Broad Museum here in LA. And I see that many of her local fans are here in attendance. So we are truly delighted that she has returned to speak to us. She asked to show one of her videos before she begins to speak. Turbulent is made in 1998. It runs about 10 minutes, so we're going to look at that first, and then Shireen will come to speak. Thank you.
از مدهوش تو را ترانه‌ای بس باشد، در کشتن ما چه میزنی تیغ جفا، ما را سر تازیانه‌ای بس باشد، ما را سر تازیانه‌ای بس باشد.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. I just thought it was important to look at a piece of art before we start, just to set the mood. Thank you, Jeffrey Spear, for inviting me into this wonderful museum. And I wanted to also acknowledge Mr. Ali Reza Ardakani from the Farhang Foundation for this introduction to the Getty Museum and for supporting me all throughout the years. And there's so many people in the house that I'm very moved to see, and first and most is Mrs. Broad. Thank you for being here. Your husband's memories lives in my heart deeply. There is also Ed Shad, the curator of my exhibition, somewhere in the room, who curated my exhibition in 2019. Ed Patuto, also from the Broad, Human Sarshar and Homa Sarshar, the amazing Iranian scholars and dear friends, and so many others that I won't name at the moment. I just want to begin by saying how truly flattered and humbled I was to have been invited to speak at the Getty. But I must admit I had some hesitation to agree to speak, as I wasn't sure what I may offer in the context of such important historical exhibition, Persia, ancient Iran, and the classical world. As I'm only a conceptual contemporary Iranian artist, and one that hasn't even been back to Iran for so many decades. But then again, I remember the famous saying that you can take an Iranian out of Iran, but you can never take Iran out of an Iranian. So today, I prepared something very unique, really a very intimate talk that I can share with you, my story, that will really basically tell you the evolution of my personal and artistic journey. But before I do so, I just want to make a few very general comments that I think it would help you to understand my work and my art practice. First and most is that it is almost impossible to discuss my work without considering my personal history and life circumstances that basically have helped shape my vision as an artist. And I believe, now that I look back, every concept, every character, every narrative, and my work, whether in still photography or video or film, have stemmed from issues that I have faced as a human being, as a woman, and as an Iranian. And sometimes I think that had it not been for those emotional, psychological, and political anxieties that I felt when I first arrived to the United States to this date, and distance from the homeland, I would not have been an artist. And yet my work is really about framing certain existential and political issues that I face, and I'm constantly looking for an answer. But why my work is very personal, private, and comes from a very intuitive place is not autobiographical. My work has always been a way of bridging what goes on inside of me, my inner world, the private world, my emotions, with the outer world, the socio-political realities that are far bigger and transcend my small existence. To give you, wanted to mention that also, as I said, it's impossible to discuss my work without looking at my personal history as an artist, but it's also looking impossible to look at my work without considering the history of my country. And this is something that I think it arrived with the Islamic Revolution in 1978 that basically defined the course of my life and many people of my generation. And in very strange ways, I find that myself and my work have become narrator of Iranian histories, ancient, modern, and contemporary history in a highly fictionalized and stylized way. Just to give you an example to the people who are somewhat familiar with my work, with Women of Allah, basically my work captured the spirit of the revolution, the Iranian revolution in 1978, the religious fervor and the fanaticism that flourished into the Iranian society. With the Book of Kings, it was a body of work that basically went after the spirit of patriotism that came with the Green Movement, the most pivotal political event after the 1978 revolution. With Women Without Men, my feature film in 2009, we captured the moments of Iranian history in 1953 when there was a coup d'etat in Iran that basically removed the democratically elected prime minister. There's other obsessions that I've had with the Iranian culture, although I must say that I've been mainly educated in the West since I was 17 years old. But the literature in Iran plays a huge role in my work, always from ancient to contemporary and modern literature. If you look at my photography, the still photography, the calligraphy that is inscribed in my work comes from some very ancient to some modern and contemporary poets, from Forough Farrokhzad to Tahir Safarzadeh, Akhavan Saleh, Ferdowsi to Khayyam. And if you, again, with Woman Without Men, I took an Iranian novel by Shahnoush Parsipur, which I readapted into a screenplay and made into a movie. Many of my video installations, such as Turbulent, it takes the poetry of Rumi. I worked with great master musicians, Shahram Naziri, but also Mohsen Namju and Susan Dehim. And songs often come from very ancient Iranian mystics. Generally speaking, if I could explain about the style of my work when I look back, it's not just literature, but the poetic nature of my work that borrows from the history of poetry and mysticism that is rooted in Iranian history, Persian and Islamic tradition. And if you look at carefully at the aesthetic of my work, you can see how it also borrows from, let's say, the tradition of Persian miniature paintings in the way that it integrates text and image to an elaboration of Islamic art, classic Islamic art, the idea of use of calligraphy, void, abstraction, repetition, symmetry. My work, if you really look carefully, is very much based on those aesthetics. Now, I'm going to do something very new. I'm going to start with this series of images. I think we can now project the images. I will take you on a journey of my life, but my arts and my country, if there is such a thing that you can make such parallels, just so you can see how these three things have always overlapped. I was born in a beautiful city of Qazvin. Some people might disagree, but I think it's very beautiful, in 1957. Basically, Qazvin was a very conservative religious city, I would say, perhaps the third most religious city in the country of Iran. My father and mother, my father was from Kerman, my mother from Qazvin, and my father was a self-educated man who became a doctor, and although he was a physician, he had a passion for farming, but he was truly an intellectual, and it became my very big idol in my life. Living in Qazvin, we lived in a beautiful house with a very special architecture. My father was obsessed with flowers. It was a little bit paradise that I remember growing up there. It was just like the Persian miniature paintings, I would say. And I basically had a very lovely, happy childhood there's absolutely no darkness in that history. The only thing I can mention about being raised in Qazvin was that the city was extremely religious and conservative, and most of us had to wear the veil in the outside. But the inside of our home, we lived a very modern, progressive life, as my father was traveling abroad quite a bit and was very Western influenced. So there was this dichotomy between how we lived in the inside of our home and what was going on the outside. Many of my friends were very religious, and I have to say that at the time I felt very conflicted between the religious background in my city, and I also had some religious tendencies, and yet my parents not being quite religious. So I remember as a child I carried some feeling of shame or guilt for my parents not being the perfect Muslims or so. And this became very obsessive for me, and I still think about it these days. As I sat in that beautiful garden, I kept worrying that one day we're going to be punished by God. And what other thing I wanted to mention is that at this time, which was about early 1970s, there was something brewing underground, which was the foundation of the Iranian Revolution, mainly by Iranian students, but also by people who were very religious and moving toward the idea of Islamization of the country. And many of my friends ended up being revolutionaries and eventually became activists. So I got my paperwork done, and by the time I was 17, my parents sent me to your city of Los Angeles. So this happened in 1975. I came with my sister, and I studied right here in, I think it's called West Side High or something. And that's a picture of my prom. I have to tell you the anecdote is that I didn't speak a word of English. And one of my teachers, I think it was government class, he felt so bad about me not having a date that he matched me with this other guy who didn't have a date. So the two of us went on a prom. And basically, it was a very silent prom. But nevertheless, you know, this was my years of being 17, 18. My parents would come and visit. But may I say that I never quite felt comfortable being outside of Iran. And my sister, who's in the middle, quickly went back. And I remember before the revolution begging my father to send me back to Iran, but it was his decision, and he was very stubborn about me staying in the US. And I think part of him was concerned about what was brewing in Iran, that perhaps people like myself may have become an activist eventually. But nevertheless, they all left, and I was alone at the age of 17 in Los Angeles. But as soon as Martouk, my sister, left, I packed up my bags and I went to Northern California. And it was, I think it was about 1978. I actually had to refer to the Broad catalog to see my own history. Can I be honest, Ad? I really had to check your dates of the chronology of my life. This is how good and thorough that exhibition was. But I went to UC Berkeley with a lot of excitement, although I have to say I was quite alone. And unfortunately, my studies coincided with the coming of the revolution, which took place in January of 1978, exactly as I was beginning the art school. So I have to admit that the next years of my studies in Berkeley was overshadowed by this incredible grief and my concern about the walls coming down in Iran. And basically, from this period, I didn't see my family for the next 12 years. And if you remember, there was a great amount of hostility in the US against Iranians. And I remember at UC Berkeley, there was a lot of anti-Iranian students. I don't want you to read all the letters with the Iranian audience here. I'll soon get to that. That was the letter from my mother. I know Ali Reza would read the whole thing. So what I wanted to say was that basically it was impossible for me to focus in my education. And may I confess that I was one of the worst students at the UC Berkeley, both undergraduate and graduate school. I guess I just blame it on the revolution like everything else. But basically, it was also emotionally very testing for me, as well as economically, and that I basically felt destabilized by not having any access to my country and my family at the age of 18 or 19. And I feel to this day that this was the groundwork of the sense of melancholy and grief and the emotions that resurface later in my artwork. And I wanted to go right up to my moments. I guess I was still like 18 or 19, and some of these letters that came from my family, because at that time, actually, you couldn't even really make many phone calls. There was also the war with Iraq that immediately took place after the revolution that further complicated things, and all diplomatic relationship between US and Iran ended. So it was a very traumatizing experience for me and many of you of my generation. In 1983, I said goodbye to California since I was such a bad artist. And I said, okay, I start a new chapter. This is a chapter in New York where there was this incredible underground artistic life going on. At this moment, I met my last husband. Don't worry, I only married twice. Oh, I only married once. But my Korean husband, Kyung Park, which was a true visionary and intellectual who was an architect but had founded this amazing not-for-profit institution called the Storefront for Art and Architecture. I was immediately inspired by him, and I not doing any more artwork, I married Kyung Park, and I basically worked for the next 10 years with him at the storefront and had a child called Cyrus. But what happened in those years of storefront, I ended up taking out a lot of images because I was told I have too many pictures. But these years at the storefront, not only I was exposed to great underground scene of New York, the Bohemia, meeting fantastic artists, but also I think the storefront became my true foundation and education. As an artist, that I learned the amount of research that is important to make your work, and that work of art is not just purely intuitive, but is something that you gain through time and knowledge and experience. And but yet, for the next 12 years or more or less, I just dedicated myself to support other artists' work and their visions. But something happened in 1990, I believe. Ed, is that correct? I finally decided to return to Iran to see my family with my son Cyrus after not having been there for so long. And this is what I look like. In 1990, I obviously had to get an Iranian passport. And what's really was shocking on a private level to see my mother, who was once a very modern, cosmopolitan woman, now being veiled. And just to give you an image of what my sister looked like before and after the revolution. And I think for me, the return to Iran was very profound in many dimensions. In one way, the reunion with the country and the family obviously was extremely important to me. But on the other hand, I think I was so shocked by the amount of changes that had taken place in the country and how people had been transformed beyond their own recognition. So I found a new obsession of trying to really go after comprehending why did the revolution happen and how did it happen and what was the impact of the revolution on the people. And this with no idea of making art, just on a personal curiosity. And I started to read, I started to interview many friends who had been there during the revolution and basically interviewed them. But as I came back to New York, I think that this obsession with Iran continued, and art, in a way, became a union between me and my country, an excuse to continue this relationship. And I had become obsessed with the subject of the revolution, but mainly the subject of women. And this new series called Unveiling, the new series, the first body of work was shown in 1993 at the Franklin Furnace, is really my entry to the art world. And at the time when I came back, I lost slowly interest in working at the storefront and slowly looking to find my own identity as a human being and as an Iranian, as an artist. And my obsession at the time with this series of work was really about the female body and its problematic within the Iranian culture, the Islamic culture, and that how the female body, it sort of prompted the idea of sexuality and temptation in public domain, and therefore had to be concealed. I use primarily the writings of Forough Farrokhzad, who most of you know is a beloved Iranian poet, who so courageously wrote about the problematics of being a woman in the Iranian traditional society and the problematics of sexuality, female gaze, and temptation. Unfortunately, I won't be able to get into too much detail about any of the work since I have so much to show you today. After the Unveiling series, I took another step. Oh, by the way, I wanted to show you some of the influences, since today I really wanted to share with you some of my references where these ideas came from. I collected some of these charms in Iran, in the bazaar, and I was very, very interested in the integration of the text on the body. So after the Unveiling series, I started to take the next question, the next topic, which is taking the female body the female existence in the Iranian society, but now in relation to the revolution, the Islamic revolution. And for me, what became central in this body of work was the subject of martyrdom, those who willingly participated in the process of revolution and stood at this intersection of love of God, faith, religion, self-sacrifice, but ultimately brutality, violence, and death. And what became more interesting for me is how certain women volunteered to be militant in the post-revolutionary Iran. So I did a lot of research and collected many images from different journalism and different places, and basically this all gave birth to the Woman of Allah, which basically became a group of self-portrait that I performed myself, mainly because I was available and I knew more or less what emotions I wanted to convey. But all of the series was limited to the issue of the female body, as I mentioned, was very important. Then the text that was all written by Iranian women like Tahireh Safarzadeh, whose writings were very much devoted to the revolution, the weapon, which obviously represented the question of violence, and the veil, which has a very complicated and controversial symbol, both as a symbol of solidarity with the religion, but also repression. So this body of work ended up being very controversial, and to this day it's been treated in many different ways. But nevertheless, I think this is work that was created by an artist who was living outside and did not have any answers, or was not supporting or criticizing anything, but basically was trying to frame the questions around woman militancy and the question of martyrdom in relation to the Islamic Revolution. Now, these are some of the other images. I even brought my son into the picture, so I'm a guilty one. Anyway, by 1998, I left storefront, I left the marriage. Now, this is why I told you it's a very intimate talk. I wouldn't do this very often. In fact, I don't really show these pictures very often. But I, coming back from Iran, had this incredible urge to be with the Iranian community. I didn't want to disconnect anymore. And I recalled that I had no Iranian friends before that, during the Berkeley years and in New York. And it was suddenly after I returned to Iran a few times, I really didn't want to be disconnected again from the Iranian society. So I recruited all these people from New York, including Shoja Azari, who's now my partner in life, and the one who was just singing at Turbulent. That's how we met. In 1998, my life just basically transformed, and I entered a new chapter. I started a collaboration with Susan Dehin, Shoja Azari, Qasem Ebrahimian, the amazing cinematographer, and Arita, whose photographs I took in Woman of Allah, and Richard Horowitz, who is a longtime collaborator of Susan Dehin. This collaboration also brought this whole beginning of now experimenting with the medium of moving picture with video. And now I started to get out of the studio and moved to the world, and I became very nomadic. After the success of Turbulent that was shown, it was my very first video, more or less. It's shown in Venice. We started producing lots of video with this team of Iranians, all of us living outside of Iran, and most of us wouldn't be able to go back to Iran. So we traveled from Morocco to Turkey to Mexico to Egypt to everywhere, but we were all Iranian, and we created a sort of a family together. What came with videos like I showed you is now away from the photography, this incorporation of music, theater, performance, choreography, and also landscape, which most of the times you could see my photographs are devoid of a background. And so for me, Turbulent was a tremendous opening of an experience of how to engage my audience in a double channel projections, which by the way, they're in two opposite walls, where you as the audience are conflicted between the two sides, between the female, the male, the traditional music, the non-traditional music, the more guttural versus the more acceptable kind of conformist way of music. And came with Rapture that we shot in in Morocco in 1999 came this idea of expanding my horizon into being a director, working with 200 men and women, and also moving toward a direction that was far more evocative and poetic and less directly political, like The Woman of Allah. Here, everything seemed to be told in a form of a poem. It was very allegorical. Basically, in my opinion, rapture is a kind of a series of rituals that don't make any sense. There is something surrealistic and allegorical about the activity of men within the context of this fortress that was a very masculine space, and women in nature. And basically, the woman migrated from the desert to the sea and eventually got on a boat and left, while the men remained in the fortress and watched the woman leave. And so there was something extremely symbolic about this migration of the woman, that whatever they did was to take the idea of freedom and independence and liberty as opposed to staying behind. So these are the early videos that I made. Trying to go rapid quickly because I have so much to show. In 2003, I made a bold decision to make my first feature film. Woman Without Men is a masterpiece of a novella by Shahnoush Parsipour, a beloved Iranian writer who has been living in exile for many, many years, unfortunately, and her book is banned in Iran. For me, the obsession with this book was that there was, in the one hand, you had the political part of the story, which was about Iran going through this terrible coup d'etat during the 1953, where, with the help of CIA, and they brought back the Shah and overthrew the government of Dr. Mossadegh. So there was scenes of political fervor in the streets of Tehran. But on the other hand, we pursued the lives of a few women who also were looking for an idea of freedom and independence from their difficult, oppressive lives. So here, for me, there was this poetry between the lives of the women as they looked for freedom and the country of Iran as a fifth character who equally fought for an idea of freedom. So there was something also very symbolic about this. We made this film with very little money, with a lot of hardship, creating Iran in 1953 in Casablanca. And really going back to doing massive research about the costumes, the hair and makeup, the production designs, all of which took 6 years. We started filming. Well, we started our work in 2002. We finally shot in 2008. And basically, it was really the work of Woman Without Men is elaboration of my visual signature and work as a video artist, now taking it into a more cinematic experience and also educating myself to be a storyteller as opposed to making short videos. For many Iranian people, I think this film became very nostalgic because very few films have been made from this period. We even had music from that period. I remember very extensively interviewing many people who were activists during that period, from the people who were Tudei, the Communist Party, to people who were pro-Shah, and you know, basically trying to hear every side, read many books in order to gather the information that we needed in order to make our script. Shoja Azari and I basically co-directed the film. The film went on, and these are actually some images to show you us on the streets of Casablanca trying to create replicates of images of course, we had not that many people. Our budget was extremely small, but we had visually tried to create and utilize some of the architecture of Casablanca that resembled Iran in the 50s. Now, going back to another body of work is the Book of Kings, which I mentioned earlier. The Book of Kings, of course, is a book that is written by Ferdowsi, our beloved mystic, who we are told saves the Persian language from the 10th century. It's a long, epic book of poetry that basically is a tale of heroism, idea of patriotism, nationalism, and I was fascinated. This is a book that actually I bought in an auction for very little, but I was fascinated by the story of the Book of Kings and the images. But also at the time, I was thinking about making a work called The Book of Kings that basically captured and narrated the spirit of patriotism that happened in Iran during the 2009 Green Movement, the uprising by those young faces of men and women that poured into the street of Tehran and fought for an idea of democracy. So this body of work basically, in some ways, made a reference to the ancient history of Iran, as the Book of Kings by Ferdowsi talked about Iran and the notion of patriotism during the Arab conquest. But now we're facing the same historical event during the 2009 at a very different point of history, of course. So we made this group of portraits that basically was divided between men that were the villains, the men of power, and their bodies were painted by the images of the illustrations that came from the Book of Kings. And then basically we had the faces of the patriots, the hands on the heart, which is obviously the symbol of love of a nation, patriotism. And for me, this is what's interesting about this series, is that what you really ultimately sense, just like the Book of Kings, is this intersection of love, compassion, self-sacrifice against brutality, atrocity, genocide, and death, and how patriotism and activism often intersects brutality and genocide. This happened during the Green Movement, but also happened in the Arab Springs. And I was very inspired by the Book of Ferdowsi, how we saw those men being beheaded, etc. So it was a massive project. I only showed you a few, but I think there were over 65 photographs that together sort of created this narrative about this point of history in Iran. Finally, I come to America. I have worked for the longest time, work that basically worked on the subject of Iran, or at least in a nostalgic way, made reference to Iranian history, but always from distance. And I think I reached a moment, it must have been after The Woman Without Men, when I started to travel to different places like in Egypt to photograph Egyptians and the people in Azerbaijan, that I realized that I have reached the end of my nostalgia and the end of making work that is always references to the past, a country that I cannot go back. And I realized that I have now lived in America longer than I have lived in my own country, and that I know this country extremely well. But I've never given myself the license of giving a critique about this society. And then I thought about how if there is no freedom of expression in my country, in this country, you have the freedom of expression. And therefore, at the time, just during the Trump or before Trump, I felt when things were shifting within the American society, that it was time for people like myself as an immigrant to be vocal and give my point of view about what I love and worship and what I dislike and criticize about the American society. So it started with my obsession with what Land of Dream means. It is the notion of Land of Dreams as a really a reference to American society, a place where dreams come true, a place of dreamers. But is this definition of an identity still true? And it takes me back to my obsession with dreams very much. For a long time, I've been obsessed with dreams and how dreams are often a projections of our nightmares or our fears and anxieties. And I felt at this point of history, in a country that was made by the blood of immigrants, suddenly there was a lot of anxiety of people who were not native to this country. And I felt that by making a new project that was clearly from the point of view of an Iranian, that I could share my perspective. I went to New Mexico to make this project, and first of all, this project involved photography, video, and a full feature-length film. New Mexico is an incredibly beautiful state, but partially I went because the landscape of New Mexico, it's really nostalgic of Iranian landscape. I don't know if many of you as Iranians have been there, but I could weep when I go to New Mexico because many of this landscape is just immediately reminiscence of what I remember from my childhood. But also demographically, New Mexico is one of the poorest states in America, and extremely diverse demographically by Native Americans, African Americans, lots of Mexican immigrants, and many, many people who are functional, dysfunctional. It's an incredibly complex state. So starting in 2019, actually, for my exhibition at the Broad Museum, I decided to go for it and break my own taboo about not making a work about America. I shot over 200 photographs of Americans of diverse backgrounds. Again, Native Americans, people who were white, people who were homeless, and basically people who were functional and dysfunctional, old, young, women and men. And it was really moving for me for the first time, not really for the first time, but a recent development that I am photographing average citizens, no more models, no more self-portraits, but people who have lived the hard life. And their expression, their faces, is a projection of their lives. And it was really incredible to go nomadically in a car with two other women and my dog and a camera, and basically asking people to come to be photographed by me and also to share with me their latest dream. And so basically, we went from the city to city, from Albuquerque to Las Vegas, New Mexico, to Farmington, where there was a large Native American reservation, and photographing people, giving them a little bit of money, and spending time with them, understanding who they are. And this lady, for example, had just gotten out of the hospital. He was homeless. It was incredibly satisfying as I found myself like a reporter, not just an artist, but really a journalist. But the Iranian in me insisted that I bring into this work that is about American culture, something about the Iranian background in me. I actually went back eventually to a book that is written by a person who was born in my own city, Mr. Qazvini, who was born in the 11th century, and the book has never been translated, but it's called Ajoyib al-Makhluqat. It's a book that is wonders of creatures. It's really a book of cosmology. It's a book that is written, it's a book of science, but it's also a book that exists somewhere between heaven and earth. And I felt that it was really important that these images that although about American subjects that had my inscription and my calligraphy and my Iranian cultural background, and that somehow that even though I was no longer making work about Iran, the work was Iranian because I was Iranian. And it was really important for me for the first time to experiment for having Farsi text in the background of American people's faces. And this became a kind of a poetic union between myself and America, my subject and me as a photographer. And I have to say something else, that for me there was something extremely poetic also about this relationship between photography and dreams. And for me, photography is something that it always freezes a moment. It becomes permanent. It lives forever. But dreams are so ephemeral and so impermanent, and they vanish so quickly. And I thought that was really beautiful about this project and how I wanted to approach it. So anyway, I went on to do this tedious handwork. Every one of these were inscribed on the background of these images, one by one, and these fantastic images of people that each had their own stories to share with me. And these are some of the pages of that book, which, by the way, it only exists in the Library of Tehran. And one of my assistants who was visiting Iran went to the library and basically photographed each page, and we recreated the book, and we designed them for the photograph, but also recreated them for the video. This is an installation shot, as everything was designed as a salon-like installation where I wanted this body of work to be read as a portrait of a nation, portrait of America. This is what America looks like to me, the diversity, the diverse faces of people from different ethnicities, different races, different economic class, and genders, and religions. And I wanted the people to have this experience when they came to the room. They were faced with all these eyes that they were looking at you, not you just looking at them. So these are some of the shots that I have of the installations. I've been widely traveling in different locations in the world. Now, sharing with you very quickly some images of the video. As I told you earlier, that my work always stems something very personal, but to go further, I also have women, pretty much, I didn't know I'm doing this unconsciously, but women who are playing me. As I get old and ugly, I have young people who are playing me and much younger than me. But for the last several videos, I've noticed that I'm gravitating toward women who are small, skinny, and have kind of a particular demeanor and are kind of very fragile, just like I am. So in this video, it's very much like a political satire. It's not believable. Sheila Van played Simin, who is basically going in between this incredible colony that existed inside of this mountain. That, by the way, this is an incredible sacred mountain that was in the Navajo Nation that we were able to get permission to shoot. And basically, the satire was that part of the video existed in this colony, that there were all these Iranian people dressed in lab coats that were carefully looking at Americans' portraits and analyzing their dreams, that basically she was their spy that was able to collect their dreams and bring it to this very claustrophobic, Kafkaesque space that they analyzed and interpreted. And then basically I was the one who obviously did all the photographs. And we created this catalogs and this library of different Americans' dreams in the video that they were basically the interpretations of Americans' dreams by Iranian agents. And again, as you could see, this is the book that is so central to the story as she looks for interpretations, and she's surrounded by the images in the video. That was also shown at the Broad exhibition. I'm sure many of you have seen, but these are the photographs, obviously, that I had taken in the video. It seems like she took those photographs. And here we got this image of a man who is represented like a kind of a hierarchy, the kind of the spiritual leader, and that she has done the forbidden because she identified with her subjects' dreams, and she became emotionally invested in them. These are some of the images from the other video, which were the people, the subject of her interviews, and people whom she visited, people, American people from different facets and economic background, facets of life. And basically, you could see that she introduced herself as this Iranian artist who basically is doing a project who is involving photography, but also collecting people's dreams. Obviously, in the video, she was lying because she was actually turning around, going back and giving these photographs to the Iranian colony. It was fascinating for me to go door to door to people from the reservations to small towns and asking them and literally introducing myself as I am Shirin Neshat, an Iranian artist who's trying to make a video that is basically about an Iranian collecting people's dreams and taking their pictures. Would you allow me to enter your home and film you? And would you allow me to take your photographs? And exactly this is what she did in the video. So life and art were pretty close. And some of these people had never been in any film before. And it was tremendous bonding, can I say. I had never met Native Americans before, even though I've been in this country since 1975. It's a shame. And it was incredibly and profoundly bonding between me and them, and how we related to each other as marginalized communities. And so this continue with the story. So she encounters different people of Native Americans, a military who had nightmares about the nuclear holocaust, and obviously we filmed his dreams. And these are some of the images of the video. And Albuquerque, one of the most beautiful settings for many films these days, including this written, I think Breaking Bad was a fantastic TV series that also shot in this railroad station. And finally, she leaves both the colony and the Iranian society. It always feels to me that my characters, to me, have always been leaving. My mother always tells me, can you make once for all a film that the woman is not walking on a road or not leaving? It's always like they're running away or something. And this time she has a car, and she has a Mercedes-Benz, who I think belongs to Saul Tryon, my producer, who's sitting here in the audience, I think. Okay, so next I got really ambitious. Believe me, I don't know what comes in me to, and I had all these notes to read and I didn't even look, got too nervous. But I don't know what comes over me. I should never be doing this, but making movies is like moving a mountain. From raising the money to writing a script that usually takes many years, and also to be able to attract a different audience who will be able to see an artistic film that is also narratively accessible. And so the challenge was here that I had an idea, Land of Dream, for photography, which was about how to capture people's photographs and portraits, but also their dreams. Then the video, which became a kind of a poetic story, very short, but not a full blown out feature-length film. So we went for it. Again, with Shoja Azari, we collaborated with the great Jean-Claude Carrier, a beloved French scriptwriter. And in 2020, we shot the video in 2019. We returned to New Mexico, and we shot the film during the pandemic. This film was ambitious because the story this time was not just about the Iranian colony and US, but she, as an Iranian, was actually working for the American government. She worked for the Census Bureau that was also quite surrealistic and not believable, but the American government had added a new question to the questionnaire, which was every American citizen had to say what was their latest dream. So she would go to she would generally go to, it's very satirical, but she would go to every home and introduce herself and say that, and my last question is, what is your last dream? And people usually like, what? I have to tell my dream. Say, yes, this is a new law. And this is something that I felt that it's really the path that we're going in this country, where the abortion is becoming illegal and all kinds of things. Maybe it's not so unimaginable that soon we'll have the American government having the surveillance on people's subconscious and wanting to know what are they dreaming about, what are they trying to buy, what is going on in their fears, what are they worried about, and maybe that would affect their policies. And also, I think it's very interesting because in our film, the Census Bureau is also a kind of an integration of the corporate America, like Twitter is, how Elon Musk wants to buy Twitter, but also the White House, the American government. So there is this kind of a funny fantasy of us that one day America will be run by Twitter. And so in this very kind of comical situation, this woman who has her own secret agenda, without telling you the whole story, the film is opening at the Tribeca Film Festival. It opened in Venice Film Festival in the fall of 2021, and it will open in Tribeca in June. And it will be, I'm happy to say, with the help of Ali Reza Ardakani at UCLA, it will open on September 30th, and then it will have its theatrical release in LA and New York in September. But basically, what was I saying? Basically, she is working at the Census Bureau, and she encounters, guess who? Matt Dillon, who is her bodyguard. And I felt it was really funny because she's in this intersection in America, facing with two men. One of them is Alan, this man who is super macho, super arrogant, kind of knows it all. That's part of America. That is this air of superiority, kind of a modern cowboy, is always on a motorbike instead of a horse. And then on the other hand, you have this pretty boy, William Moseley, who is very kind of naive, romantic, just like her. It's a kind of modern hippie in America, that everything is so good and sort of very easygoing. And so it was this kind of symbolic decision of who she's closest to. There's two people who represent a different aspect of American society. So again, a very conceptual approach to making a film. And the film goes in and out of dream and reality. And Sheila Van, again, plays the main role. And she's an extraordinary actress who, by the way, played in The Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night, one of my absolute favorite films. And it is a young woman who most of her life is raised in America, but I think she's completely invested in her Iranian identity. I think these are some of the, I think Rebecca Comerford, who is one of the actresses who I show here, is here somewhere in the audience, who happens to live in California. And then I had also Isabella Rossellini, who gave me the honor to work with her. So tough working in the pandemic with very little money, trying to make a work about an Iranian immigrant in the United States. But we did it, and I mean, the film would not be a huge box office success, but it's an effort. And before I leave you, I just want to say a few things that just leave you with some notes that I said earlier, that it is at this point of my career and my life that I've realized that I'm not going to continue making work that sticks only with the notion of nostalgia and the romanticism of returning to Iran. And that basically I've made peace with the idea that here I am. I will live as a nomad and I will continue to make work. And again, as long as I'm behind that work is Iranian. And this idea that I've come to accept is the duality in my identity as a human being. I'm a nomad, I'm a person of hybridity, and therefore I will never completely belong to anywhere. Most likely I will never be anywhere that I look like everyone else and speaks the same language. And that I'm always going to be an outsider, both within the Iranian culture and the American culture. And the question of national identity, Jeffrey and I spoke about in the context of this exhibition, and I wonder whether you could determine better than I whether I qualify with the notion of a national identity as an Iranian or an American or Iranian American. I leave that up to you. And finally, I just wanted to say that perhaps I and my work are really an embodiment of that kind of Iranian identity conflict that exists in every one of you who is Iranian today. That we are people who are born to an amazing, great, ancient culture of Persia, as you can see in this exhibition, in this incredible museum. A culture of mystics and poets and scientists and music and literature, and yet we're defined by the world, by the current regime, that basically a culture of fanaticism, brutality, corruption, and political injustice. Therefore, the emotions that instigate in my work perhaps are really trying to steer a common emotion in Iranian people, and that is grief of our tragedies that we have experienced, the melancholy, yet grace, pride, and great resilience. And I think we Iranians are great survivors, and I am one of them. Thank you very much.